lead us in.
Hello. Maybe. We're gonna see if all of this works. Hopefully it does. Hello, everyone. I'm David, or Eris, and over there is Nakara. And we're gonna get started on our inaugural attempt at a sort of science-y space tech other show here at Relay. As you can see, it's called Relay Space, or as you saw in the intro thing. I'm hoping that people can see us. And
I can see us.
Good. Okay, if you can see us, then we're pretty much all good. I know that we're a little bit late here. As we're going to be talking all about SpaceX today, we figured that we should probably, run this on a rocket launch timetable of we've been delayed. So we're good to start now, though. So, Eric, welcome.
Hi. So, as many of you know who've watched for a while, this is one of my favorite topics. One of the topics I actually know the most about. So we figured we would start our new show with something that is familiar.
Now, the goal of this new segment is thanks, Rudy. Every 2-ish weeks, we're going to try and do a sort of, not quite a deep dive, but a medium dive into a science or space or tech related topic. We've actually got a form for people to send us some topics for suggestions. We're going to be just covering stuff. And today we're covering SpaceX.
Yes, we are. So I actually have no idea how long this is going to run. We planned for 60 minutes, but we also have an entire layout of all of our topics. So we'll see how long we get run. This is a total experiment. Thank you for joining us for our experiment. And I'm just going to quickly grab the link here for that form so that you can submit topics for us. All right. So, this is a great picture here. This is Elon Musk with his maracas, partying with the 8 staff members of SpaceX in 2002.
Is the mariachi band, were they part of the staff?
No.
Okay.
No. This was a party at the sort of opening of their first facility in El Segundo, California. So you want to throw up the other picture of El Segundo there?
I can do that. This is all experimental, so I'm going to hope that this
if this doesn't work, then we're just screwed.
The image, of course, is not going to switch over because...
no, of course not.
There. El Segundo.
Excellent. So this was the much vaunted first rocket factory for SpaceX. This was the facility back in 2002. SpaceX was founded by Elon Musk basically because he wanted to allow NASA to get more funding. So he wanted to do something exciting in space. But then he realized that none of the things that he planned to do, which were mostly one-off stunts, really would really even help that much because the underlying problem was that getting to space was really expensive. What that actually amounted to was before the founding of SpaceX, he actually went to Russia and tried to buy an intercontinental ballistic missile from Russia so he could launch a greenhouse to Mars. That was his one-off stunt that he wanted to do. And the Russians were kind of treated him like crap and told him to go away, basically. And on his way home, he figured out that he'd done a bunch of research, and he showed a few of his buddies there that, hey, I think we can build this rocket ourselves. Now, do you want to grab that third image?
course I do. I'm
So
all over the images.
That's right. So this was an early image of Falcon 1 inside the tiny little rocket factory in El Segundo, California. And you can roll on to the next one too. Falcon 1 was basically, they were trying to figure out how to make rockets. That's where they were at that point. Falcon 1 was 21.3 meters tall, about 1.7 meters in diameter. It used the Merlin 1A engine originally. The Merlin 1A, it was a kerosene and liquid oxygen engine, which actually Merlin engine still is kerosene and oxygen 16 years later. And the Merlin engine has now evolved all the way to the Merlin 1D. Back then, though, they were running this engine with a thrust of 318 kilonewtons.
What is a kilonewton?
A kilonewton is a unit of thrust. So this is basically, I have no idea how they define a kilonewton. You're asking me to define units of measure. I got nothing, man.
I'm throwing things at you right and left.
The reason I even mention it is that you'll be able to see the kilonewtons increase as we go along. The first flights had 318 kilonewton first stage and a 31 kilonewton second stage, which the second stage engine was called the Kestrel. Now,
that's a type of bird, isn't it?
It is a type of bird. So is the Falcon, and so is the Merlin. All birds. So, we're gonna take a quick jump back here. We're gonna go back to early employees. So obviously Elon Musk was the original employee. He was the founder and CEO. He had just come off of selling the sale of PayPal, which netted him
doing an appropriate pose.
Yeah, it's about perfect. I like it.
Thank you.
Elon Musk had just come off the sale of PayPal, which he had been one of the founding members of. And he found himself with about $200 million. And he decided after he bought a McLaren F1 that he wanted to start a rocket company. There's a great picture of him. The only thing inside that El Segundo factory, there's a great picture of him with just his McLaren F1 sitting in there. Now, moving along, the second most important employee, and arguably the most important in some ways, is Gwynne Shotwell.
So Musk founded it, right? He put the money up front, started SpaceX, and brought people on.
Yeah, and so he took half of his money and started and put it into SpaceX. That was $100 million when he founded it. And then he brought on a few other people early on. Most importantly, Gwynne Shotwell, who is seen here actually just yesterday, but it's such a great picture that I had to use it. She basically runs the company day to day. That is her job. Early on, her job was to sell the rockets. That was her thing. A rocket salesperson is not quite the same as a salesperson, She basically, her job was to get contracts for SpaceX early on and to try and convince people that a rocket. First of all, no one had ever made a commercial rocket company. People had tried and everyone had failed. So she managed to go around and get contracts for Falcon launches when, in all honesty,
hey kids,
you're selling a wing and a prayer. So Gwynne Shotwell is fantastic, and Elon Musk loves her because she runs the company while he gets to also indulge his other interest, which is pretty intense at the moment, which is Tesla. we're going to move along to Tom Mueller. Now, the reason I jump back is Tom Mueller is the Propulsion Chief Technology Officer. So the Merlin 1A is his baby.
Oh, come on.
That was
didn't
interesting.
work.
That one did not work. Oh, well.
I'll find
Anyway.
out quickly.
Yep, totally. No problem. Tom Mueller is basically the king of propulsion tech at SpaceX. And the reason that Elon hired him was Tom Mueller had worked in propulsion for many years. And he actually was, at the time Elon hired him, he was building his own gas generator cycle rocket engine in his garage. So, gives you an idea what kind of guy he is.
Now, I do kind of want you to clarify that one, because building a rocket engine in his garage.
Yep. What's to clarify?
Nope, that's it. Just making sure. I just want, because, I mean, I know what's in my garage. Nothing. And I just wanted to make sure that the difference between my garage and his garage is just a rocket engine, nothing else.
Yeah, just that's it.
Okay,
yeah.
cool. We're basically the same, he and I, then.
Basically, yeah, totally. Basically, he was sick and tired of not being listened to at his other job or his old job. And so he decided to make his own rocket engines, and he was flying them as part of an amateur rocketry group. Basically building his own engines and attaching them to rockets, and off they'd go.
Now, I remember in the news a couple weeks ago, there was a guy who said he was going to launch himself in a steam-powered rocket so that he could prove that the world was flat.
Not the same. Not the same guy.
Okay.
No.
Good.
No. So, and the other one I wanted to mention is Hans Koenigsmann. Hans Koenigsmann is most notable here. Well, he's notable for a lot of reasons, but one of the biggest reasons is that, besides the people already mentioned, he has been there from the very beginning. He was one of the first employees, and he is VP of Mission Assurance. Basically, it's his job to make sure that nothing blows up. And so, very important. All right, so we're going to move back on to Falcon 1. So, Falcon 1 we've already described. It's 21 meters tall. And let's take a look at the first flight.
Where's this?
You got it.
This one.
That's the one.
Yes.
Right there.
Okay.
All right.
Give me a second to pull this up, and let's hope that this...
Cross your fingers, everybody. On a wing and a prayer. Are you Picard?
I'm hoping.
Woo! All right. So,
Is
that playing or not? I don't think it's playing. Anyway, while he tries to fix that, Falcon 1 Mission 1 had been delayed for a very long time. There was a lot of tension around this. Originally, SpaceX had a launch site at Vandenberg, California, where they wanted to launch from. But some of the other big players didn't really care for them very much. And so I believe it was Lockheed Martin. Don't quote me on that. I'm not 100% sure. But I think it was Lockheed Martin let a Titan launch vehicle sit on the pad for 6 months in Vandenberg so that SpaceX wouldn't be allowed to launch.
Can
so
I just
finally
interject there and say what a bunch of twats?
Yeah.
Okay.
So basically Elon said, fuck you, I'm taking my rocket and going away. He went to Omelek Island in the Marshall Islands out in the way out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean and launched Falcon 1. Mission 1. This was way back in 2006. About 4 years after this.
I mean, this does seem to have gotten in the air.
It does seem to have gotten in the air. It's amazing, isn't it? So, as we watch here, I'll just explain that Falcon 1 was again just a development vehicle. They were trying to figure out how to build rockets at this point. So it was a single engine. It can only lift about 180. It never lifted more than 180 kilograms to orbit. And as you can see, it's currently having a bit of trouble as it's pointing downwards.
It looks fine.
Yeah, sure. All right.
Oh, that might be a problem
though. So, believe it or not, I love this sort of little bit of history. The first satellite to fly on Falcon 1 on that mission was called FalconSat. And that was a complete coincidence.
So they actually flew a satellite on...
That mission did have a satellite, yeah. It was called FalconSat. And it was a U.S. Air Force program called FalconSat. And they just happened to have the same name. So let's take a look at the second flight of Falcon 1, which was in 2007. So I should explain. The first flight exploded because basically because a nut corroded on the fuel line. It was a silly reason. So here you can see the problem with Flight 2. And you can see as the stages separated, the first stage recontacted the engine bell for the second stage. And they thought at first that it was okay. But what they learned afterwards is that the engine was damaged and they weren't able to steer anymore. So they couldn't actually make it into orbit properly.
If you watch closely, it's going to happen right here. Yeah.
And yeah, so... yeah, right here. You can see that the first stage hits the second stage's engine. And that damaged the engine. So let's move on to Flight 3, and you'll notice a similar issue. So Flight 3 was in 2008, August of 2008.
Don't think that's supposed to happen.
So what happened on this one, unfortunately, was that after stage separation, the first stage was still burning, which, yeah, not supposed to happen. And so it hit the second stage, and it actually that one actually completely failed. It ended up, I think the second stage never ignited.
I mean, you can see little bits of things coming off when it hits, so yeah. I'm not terribly surprised, but
exactly. All right, so the interesting thing is there was only about because they were so close with this. They were basically like, okay, we know what's wrong now. All we have to do is add a 1 second delay into the stage separation, and then we're fine. And so they launched again only about 6 weeks later with Falcon 1 Flight 4. Now this one, I love that launch takeoff shot. It's just awesome.
Now, are they still launching from the little island? Because
officially, it is still. I believe it's still a space. No, it's not. They still listed as SpaceX facilities, but it hasn't been used since Falcon 1 stopped flying in 2009. So, not really. Okay. The facility itself is a U.S. military facility.
So this one seems like it's made it to stage separation.
So Flight 4 went very well. And as you can see here, at stage separation, it didn't hit anything.
Handy when you're dealing with rockets.
And so simply because it didn't hit anything that time, the flight was a complete success, and they were able to deliver their. Yeah, they're all in the same island, Flint Dragon. So they were able to deliver their boilerplate satellite that was on board called RatSat to low Earth orbit.
And there's the fairings. Those you can see them drifting away. They come into play more later.
Yes, they do. But this was a huge thing for SpaceX. It was enormous. They were basically at this point. We're 2008. They're 6 years in. This is their first success, and it was not for a customer. It was just, they were just trying to get a success. They were out of money at this point. They had a couple years prior, they had won a contract called the Commercial Orbital Transportation Services contract from NASA, which ended up being worth about $400 million. But because that contract also required them to start developing the Falcon 9, they spent all of their money developing Falcon 9, so they didn't actually really have more money. So they were in a bit of a bind. By December of 2009 or 2008, apologies. By December of 2008, they were out of money. They were on the brink of bankruptcy, and the problem for Elon Musk was that so was Tesla. He didn't have. He was in a lot of trouble. He had managed to get some additional funding because one of his cousin's companies had just sold, and he ended up with $20 million out of that. But at the end of the day, when you're running two companies simultaneously, they're both in startup, $20 million doesn't go very far. He had split the money between Tesla and SpaceX in December, and just so he could keep paying salaries, and was just trying to find a way out of his predicament when on December 23rd, 2008, he got a call from NASA. And NASA said, "You have been selected for NASA's commercial resupply services, and we are giving you a contract of $1.6 billion.
That's...
Yeah.
Now, when NASA gave them this $1.6 billion, they had only ever launched one Falcon 1 successfully, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So I could today theoretically go to NASA and be like, yo, I'm developing a rocket in my backyard. Can I have $1.6 billion? And they'd give it to me.
No.
Oh.
If it was still 2006 maybe, or 2008. But it's not anymore in space, and they have SpaceX, so they don't care anymore.
They don't need me anymore. Damn it! So close.
All right, so we'll check out the final flight of Falcon 1. At this point, they had $1.6 billion. Elon Musk had taken out a loan against that money to also save Tesla, and things were much, much brighter. Now, keep in mind, they had won that $400 million for commercial orbital transportation services with for Falcon 9 a few years prior. So they were already well into development of Falcon 9 when they won the commercial resupply services contract with the giant contract. So at this point, they're like, well, we have one Falcon 1 left. We're gonna light her up, let it go, launch a satellite, get a good success again, and then we're gonna move on. Initially, they had planned to create a commercial version of Falcon 1. Called Falcon 1E, but shortly after this flight, they decided to scrap it because they wanted to focus on Falcon 9. So, unfortunately, Falcon 1 will will mosey on into the history books, having only had 2 successes.
Sargareth has a good question.
And
what happened to Falcons 2 through 8? That's a lot of dead Falcons. That's a lot of Falcons that weren't given a chance.
Interestingly, there was a Falcon 5 that was thought of for a little while and then canceled.
Oh.
It didn't get very far. I don't know what happened with Falcon 2, 3, 4, 6, and 7, and 8, though. You'd have to ask Elon. There's actually still people who think that he should have called Falcon Heavy Falcon 27. Anyway.
That would have been good.
So, as you can see, very successful mission here for Falcon 1, launching Razaksat. So, we're going to move along now to the inception of Falcon 9. So, Falcon 9 1.0. I'm actually going to have you bring up the picture first.
Okay. Give me a moment. Open that up.
And so, Falcon 9 1.0 is not really something that a lot of people have seen. It didn't fly very much, and it doesn't look the same. As you can see, Falcon 9 version 1.0 is a little stubby.
Yep.
This was Falcon 9 version 1.0. It was 47.8 meters tall compared to the 21 meters tall of Falcon 1, so it was over twice as tall. And it was 3.66 meters in diameter, so almost twice the diameter as well. Payload to low Earth orbit here is interesting, though. Whereas the payload to low Earth orbit maximum for Falcon 1 was about 400 kilograms. The maximum payload to low Earth orbit for Falcon 9 version 1.0 was 10,000 kilograms.
I think they got a slight increase there.
Yeah, well, they did go from 1 engine to 9 engines.
Not sure if my math checks out, but slight improvement.
Slight improvement.
Yeah.
And again, we have something I actually forgot to mention. Tom Mueller running wild with his crazy upgrades to the Merlin engine. Only the first 2 flights of Falcon 1 ever used the Merlin 1A, and then the final 3 flights used the Merlin 1C. And then the Merlin 1C engine also slid right on over to the Falcon 9. So Falcon 9 had 9 Merlin 1C engines with a liftoff. Is that
why they called it Falcon 9? Because it has 9 engines.
Yes. Thank you, David. I should have got a picture of the base of the rocket too. Also, it had a really weird format. The 9 engines were in a rectangle as opposed to like an octagon like they currently are. Anyway. Or I shouldn't say rectangle, square. So liftoff thrust of Falcon 9 at the beginning was 4,940 kilonewtons compared to the 318 of Falcon 1. Those are not the same number.
No.
And that's why you end up with such a drastically different payload. And then the second stage had a thrust of 445 kilonewtons compared to 31 for Falcon 1. All right, let's watch that video of the first launch. So this was the first ever launch of Falcon 9. Little tiny stubby Falcon 9. Super low res video. I don't know why they did that because they had already been using HD video for Falcon 1 for a while, so I don't know what their thought there was, but still pretty cool shot for the little stubby Falcon 9 flying away. So Falcon 9 version 1.0 ended up flying, looks like I am in the wrong place. Just a moment.
It's lucky you guys can't hear the sound on this, because the sound on this video is killing me.
Oh, is it?
Oh,
that's great. Why are you listening to the sound?
It autoplays for me.
Oh, good.
Yep. The sound autoplays for me. None of you guys get to hear it, but it autoplays for me. So
great. So the Falcon 9 version 1.0 only flew 5 times total. This was the demo flight, and then they had 2 flights called COTS 1 and COTS 2, which were the commercial orbital transportation services. Remember when we were talking about that before? Anyway, yeah. They were demo flights for the commercial orbital transportation services, and those were to basically prove that Dragon works. Now, what's Dragon? Well, Dragon is a spacecraft. What those contracts actually were for NASA was to send cargo to the space station. And so COTS 1 and COTS 2, which took place in 2010, December of 2010, and then May of 2012, took them a little while to get the second one off, were to basically demonstrate that Dragon worked. And then we come across the CRS-1 mission. Play that video, David.
working on it.
Now, this is very interesting because one of the reasons they made Falcon 9 with 9 engines was because if you have 9 engines, you theoretically have the ability to sustain an engine out scenario. So if you lose an engine, you can still fly. Now, ironically, the CRS-1 mission, which was the first operational mission of the CRS contract, they actually had this happen to them.
It's really loud for me. I'm sorry. Here.
Amazing. It's amazing. And you can see, it's actually a great shot there. You can see the square pattern of the engines. So 79 seconds into flight, they had one of the engines die on them. They had a loss of pressure in the engine, and it shut down as it was supposed to. So this was overall a success, but unfortunately there was a secondary payload that they were supposed to deliver, which they ended up not delivering because NASA wanted to ensure that the primary mission, the delivery of Dragon, would be a success. So this is very notable in that this is the first time that a commercial company had ever visited the space station.
This is noticeable because that's Canada right there. That's the Canada.
Look at Canada. So this checked off another box for SpaceX. They now had 2 records under their belt, which were the first commercial liquid-fueled rocket to reach orbit and the first commercial spacecraft to visit the International Space Station. All right, so we're going to move along here. So, in 2013, Falcon 9 V1.0 flew its last time with the CRS-2 mission in March. On September 29th of 2013, Falcon 9 version 1.1 flew for the first time. Now, I want to mention that Falcon 9 had always been fundamentally designed as a reusable vehicle. I'm just going to quickly check if that is the right place to play that, Dave.
Yep. We've got a giant document filled with dozens of videos and images and stuff. And the reason we actually started this late is because we were double checking some of the stuff and putting some things in at the last moment. But we've got a lot of sourcing on all of this. So we want to make sure
that's actually the right place to put that.
Right place? So
we're good to good. We're good.
This is the right place for me to put this. So
originally they actually tried to recover some of the first vehicles with parachutes. That didn't work at all. Not even a little bit. And then they're like, well, screw parachutes, they don't work. So then they went, hey, what if we just landed it using the rocket engine? And so in order to test this, they had to create a vehicle that could actually do this. So they created what they called Grasshopper, as you can see right here. Grasshopper was a basically just a first stage from a Falcon 9 version 1.0, attached to fixed landing legs, and I believe it only had a single engine, so it just would cruise up there and hover for a moment, and then go down and land. And this allowed them to basically prove out all of their software, to prove out gimbaling, to prove that they could handle coming in at weird angles. So they did a whole bunch of test flights with this Grasshopper vehicle to basically refine the technology for actually trying to land a rocket, specifically an orbital class rocket. All right.
Can I just, like, I need to interject there for a second, because we're going to see a lot of that, of it going up and coming, of various things going up and coming down and land, and it's still beautiful every single time.
Mm-hmm.
In my personal opinion, it's amazing. Sargareth, don't worry, there's going to be some kabooms later.
Yep. Yes, there will. All right, so we're going to move along to the next picture.
I'm going to try to use this one. I don't know if it will work. The last Wikipedia one gave me a headache. Come on. It did. Okay.
So I want to mention a couple things about this. So this was one of the early launches of Falcon 9V 1.1. In fact, it was the first launch. And this one's cool because this is actually for Canada. This launch was the Cassiopeia. I cannot even say
Cassiopeia?
Cassiopeia satellite for MDA, which is a company in Canada.
I don't know if Mrs. Eris is still watching this, but if she is, it gets better because later in life, Tesla launched, or SpaceX launches some satellites for Telesat. One of the recent rockets launched a 7.8 ton. We'll get to that one later, but it's for Telesat, and Mrs. Eris's dad used to work for Telesat, and this is the Cassie. Anyway, it's sorry. Carry on.
Okay. All right, so this vehicle is Falcon 9 version 1.1. You may notice right away it's not stubby.
Yeah, they seem to have slimmed it a bit.
They didn't slim it at all. They just grew it by over 20 meters. So it went from 47.8 meters tall to 68.4 meters tall, and stayed the same diameter. And the payload to low Earth orbit went from 10,000 kilograms to 13,000 kilograms. And it moved along from the Merlin 1C engine to the Merlin 1D. As a result of all of this, we ended up with 5,885 kilonewtons on the first stage and 716 kilonewtons on the second stage. Big improvement there was the second stage. Went from 445 to 716. All right. Now, shortly after this, shortly after Falcon 9 version 1.1 started, SpaceX started trying to land the boosters. This particular launch didn't have legs, but shortly after they started to have legs. And they started trying to land them after all their experiments with Grasshopper. So let's see what the results were, David.
Ladies and gentlemen, the moment you've been waiting for.
How not to land an orbital rocket booster. So this was September 2013. These were early on. They were trying to land in the water, just to prove that they could actually get them slow enough that they might be able to survive. And then here is Grasshopper having an unfortunate incident.
I like how he's just hanging out right next to the smoking wreckage.
Yep.
Oh, so sad. They were so close on that one.
So that was the first time they tried to land on the drone ship, and they were actually super excited.
It landed.
They actually managed to hit the drone ship, which is pretty amazing. And then this one is just depressing. No. As you can see, early on, these drone ships were getting the crap beaten out of them. And actually, that's something we should note. I don't think we've mentioned yet. These drone ships, the East Coast drone ship is named Just Read the Instructions. And the West Coast drone ship is named Of Course I Still Love You. And that booster right there, the leaning one, was named by the community the Leaning Tower of Tycom 8. And that just sucks. Boom. Okay.
And that is how you land a booster.
That's right. So we wanted to just show that one because it shows a good sort of summarizing of the a summary, of the attempts to land. Now we're going to rewind a little bit back to 2015 here.
Okay. I kind of want to talk. Where do you want to talk a little bit about the attempts to land? Because I want to talk a little bit about that in the grand scheme of things. Now or
fire away.
Okay, so until SpaceX and Musk came along, it was pretty much accepted that you didn't try to land rockets, correct?
I'll put it this way. A couple months ago, I was reading a Reddit comment from a guy who used to work at ULA, United Launch Alliance. And he actually mentioned that back in the early 2000s, it was occasionally brought up in the boardrooms and stuff, hey, maybe it would be a good idea if we tried to recover some of our hardware. Generally, it was considered impossible. And there's a reason for this. Anytime you add recovery hardware onto a vehicle, it lowers the amount of payload you can get to orbit. However, remember, SpaceX had Tom Mueller. Tom Mueller kept making the Merlin engine better and better and better and better and better. And their payloads weren't getting ridiculously heavier. So all he kept doing is giving the vehicle more and more and more and more margin for the payload. It had more and more and more energy to use in launch. So basically what that was doing was building up enough margin so that they could use that margin to land it. Kind of cool.
And no one else, like SpaceX were the first people to launch and land a rocket, and I know
to orbit,
yes. And then land it. And I know that I'm pretty sure. I don't remember if we were watching it. I remember watching the first actual landing.
Yeah, I was watching with my dad.
Yeah, and I don't know what watching the first moon landing would have been like. I can only imagine. But I feel like seeing a rocket come back down and re-land
pretty damn cool.
Might be somewhat of that feeling. Anyway, it was something that hadn't been done, and as far as people were concerned, could not be done. And it's one of the things that made SpaceX so...
So basically the reason that they thought it couldn't be done was that you needed to... SpaceX designed their rocket to be reused. There are fundamental things about the way that SpaceX designed Falcon 9 so that it can be reused. That requires forethought, which was very much lost on a lot of the space industry for a long time. Their launch vehicles staged way too late, which meant that the booster was going way too fast, which meant it couldn't come back. you know, lots of really, but they didn't think, hey, maybe we should make a vehicle that can be reused. They just went, hey, it's not possible, and didn't even try. So, yeah. So now we're going to enter into a period here of a couple years long that were very rocky for SpaceX. We will now show you the CRS-7 mission from SpaceX.
I was ahead of you there.
So, launch went well. This was so this is the 7th mission of the CRS contract. So it was delivering a Dragon spacecraft to the International Space Station. This was, I need a date. When was this? This was June 28th of 2015. And this was in the middle of all of those attempts to land. They had been attempting to land for a while. This may have been, if nothing had gone wrong, this may have been the first successful landing because it was planned to attempt a landing.
Spoilers. Something goes wrong.
You think? Unfortunately, for those of you watching, we have to wait a little bit because it doesn't happen right away. That's actually a very interesting topic. Normally, when something goes wrong on a rocket flight, it happens pretty quick. Generally, within the first minute of flight, usually within the first few seconds of flight, honestly. But that was not the case here. What you're going to see coming up here in about, about 30 seconds is something goes a little bit wrong. Everything's looking really good. Dragon's on its way to space. It's going to visit the space station.
Now, it appears, too, that by the timeline on the bottom, it has passed max Q, and max Q is typically the point where the rocket is under the most strain.
Not only that, it gets through stage separation.
Yeah.
Just fine.
You think that the times when a rocket's going to have something go wrong are launch, max Q, stage separation.
Stage separation, yeah. Those are pretty much the three. And you're going to see coming up here in a few seconds that something goes wrong. Actually, did it make it through stage separation? No, it didn't make it through stage. No, it didn't. It was right before stage separation. We've lost video. Why are frozen, I think.
Nope, we shouldn't be.
Okay, we're fine. Okay.
I think
I lost video.
So I think various people have been losing video, and I think the problem is Twitch, because I'm not dropping any frames. It's a Twitch thing.
So as you saw, the vehicle... Actually, can we just replay that quickly? Is that possible? Is that a thing you can do?
I can... Give me a second and I can grab it from slightly closer, yes.
Okay, cool.
Carry on.
Anyway. Shortly before stage separation, the vehicle disintegrated in flight. I say disintegrated because it didn't really explode. It just ripped itself apart. All right. Here we go. All right, let's take another look at it.
And it just...
There it goes. And it just
kind of
basically disintegrates
through the steam clouds for a second, but it's not even an explosion, right? It just...
No. It just ripped itself apart.
I know what it was.
What's that?
It was actually a secret U.S. Department of Defense laser missile destruction test.
No.
Damn it! So close.
Sorry, man. Okay, so here's what happened, and it's a very interesting thing. SpaceX had been doing a very good job up to this point, being a low-cost, very quickly moving, fast iterating new launch company. And they finally bit them in the ass. They had been trying to find high quality but off the shelf parts for some things to use as to use in their vehicles because they were much cheaper than building parts themselves or getting special aerospace grade parts. Some of the things they didn't feel were necessary. Unfortunately, inside the second stage fuel tank, there are things called COPVs, which are going to be talked about later as well. They're not much fun. COPV is a composite overwrap pressure vessel. With Falcon 9, what they do is they hold helium. The helium then pressurizes the fuel tanks so that it pushes the fuel out the engine, basically. It keeps the fuel from sloshing around too much inside the tank, and also keeps the tank from buckling on itself under vacuum. One of those COPVs, the bracket that held it in place broke. And that COPV started to fly all over the place on the inside of the fuel tank, and then eventually went right through the side of the fuel tank. And then, of course, because that happened, the vehicle then tore itself apart. The bracket that broke was rated for a much, much, much higher strain than they were putting on it, but it was an off-the-shelf part. And NASA gave them shit about that because it was an off-the-shelf part. And it broke. And as a result, they lost the mission. This was a very good lesson for SpaceX, but a very painful one. It was the first time they had a vehicle fail in flight since Falcon 1. And you're talking about a time period of like 7 years where they hadn't lost a vehicle. SpaceX stood down, as basically always happens with rocket launches. If you have a vehicle fail, you stand down until you understand what happened, and then you fix it. So SpaceX stood down for a little under 6 months, and they returned with a new vehicle, Falcon 9 full thrust.
That sounds like an 80s action movie. Falcon 9 full thrust.
Yeah, pretty much. I think that's sort of what he's going for. Or it's a vague, very, very, very sexual innuendo. Anyway.
No, I don't see it. I don't see any sexual innuendo with giant rockets and thrusting.
And full thrust? No, okay.
No, okay. I don't think so.
Fine.
I don't think anyone would be that crass.
All right. So Falcon 9 full thrust. Falcon 9 full thrust grew another 2.6 meters to a total height of 71 meters tall. The payload, however, went from 13,000 kilograms to 22,000 kilograms to low Earth orbit, and from 4,800 kilograms to geostationary orbit to 8,300 kilograms to geostationary orbit. The thrust on Falcon 9 had grown to 7,607 kilonewtons for the first stage and 934 kilonewtons for the second stage. Most of the improvement here was another upgrade to the Merlin engine. And actually, sorry, I got to clarify here because it definitely comes into play later. It was another upgrade to the Merlin engine, but one of the things that they did that really nobody had ever done before is they decided to use what's called deep cryo propellants. Now, rocket fuel, to begin with, is very cold when it's loaded into any vehicle because it's liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen or liquid kerosene like SpaceX uses, or liquid methane. But instead of just barely making it liquid like most people, or like most companies or organizations, SpaceX decided, well, what would happen if we made it almost frozen instead?
Sorry.
Are we still okay?
Yeah, it's cool. Apparently it's going lots of stutter and pauses. People are having to F5, but it's on Twitch's end, unfortunately.
Okay.
There's nothing on our end.
All right. So basically, one of the big reasons why they got so much more thrust out of, and I believe it was like a 30% increase in thrust, was a huge difference, was because if you make the propellants much colder, they're much denser, and you can actually fit more propellant into the tanks. So you actually just get a whole bunch of extra fuel. So they returned to flight with this new rocket, Falcon 9 full thrust, and they were going to try right away to land. Play that video, Mr. David. I love that you can see the green flash there. You can always see a little green flash before Falcon 9's engines start because it ignites using a mixture of two compounds called triethyl aluminum and triethyl borane. They're called pyrophoric compounds, so when they come into contact with each other, they just instantly explode into like giant flames. But they burn green, so you can always see when the engines start because you have this green flash.
Is there a reason they have to always launch at night so that we can't see the damn rocket?
They don't always launch at night.
It
just happens a lot, unfortunately.
Why can't they just launch in the day?
Hey, there's the green flash.
Yeah.
Oh, no, actually, that wasn't. Just was a weird color on the camera.
And here it comes.
And then here it is. So I want to tell you something funny about this. Originally, you hear a really loud boom when you're at the Cape, and that's the sonic boom of the rocket coming back. But for a moment, Elon Musk, who had run out to the pad, or not run out to the pad, but run out to the causeway to watch, he thought it had exploded, and he actually turned away and started to walk back inside because he heard this loud boom. But then people started shouting like, it landed, it landed, it landed.
Did he not even see it land?
I don't think he did.
Oh, man.
But pretty awesome. It's a pretty awesome sight.
It is.
And after 6 months of trying to recover from a failure, they managed to have one of their largest successes ever and become the first company to ever land an orbital class booster.
It is like it's hard to talk about how historic that is. Just it's beautiful. There's no other word for it than it's beautiful. No one else was going to try it. Period.
Yep.
Like nobody else was going to take the risk of let's try and recover, because I don't know if we get into it at all later. I didn't see it when I was looking at it, but really quickly, what are the savings of relanding a rocket and then being able to relaunch it? Like, what is it that we're actually getting here?
It really depends on what you're talking about. But based on what they're trying to do right now, you'd be looking at saving about probably about $20 to $30 million per flight, and the total cost of the flight is $60.
And so the total cost of a SpaceX flight is $60, and part of that is because they can launch and relaunch, and part of that is because they're just building their stuff cheaper. Do we know the total cost of a ULA launch?
Yeah. So Atlas V starts at they say it starts at 100 million, but I have never actually seen a launch awarded for that much. Usually it's about 130 to start, but that's a pretty basic vehicle and not anywhere near as capable as Falcon 9. So I would say to match to most of the capabilities of Falcon 9, about $200 million with ULA. With Arianespace, looking at about 160 million.
So you're looking at more than double the price to go with anyone that's not SpaceX.
The only price competitive launcher was Russia with the Proton rocket, which was also 50 to 60 million dollars. The problem was Proton's reliability fell to only about 90%, and they had a series of failures, so that's not good. And it basically was, it didn't fly for a couple of years, then they brought it back, and then they had another failure, and it's just a mess. So it was the only reliable vehicle for money.
Okay, so sorry.
So let's head on to the first water landing. So this was the first landing on a drone ship, and this drone ship was, of course, I Still Love You. The flight was CRS-8. I love this shot. It is kind of absurd, isn't it? Pretty damn cool. So this was only 4 months after the first landing. They actually did have, in between, they actually had 2 failures trying to land on water. But then they had their first success, which was fantastic.
Can I just... Des is saying, how can you not cheer for something like that? I just want to... I need to play this video again, and I want to play for you the sound. So...
So you're seeing live footage of Course I Still Love You, our drone ship, waiting for the... There's the engine. Slow it down, lights are deployed.
Love it.
Yeah,
I love it. I love it.
You can't see, but I do genuinely have tears in my eyes, and I have, like, it's... Sorry. Carry on, Eric.
So we're going to watch a few more cool videos now. The Dragon 2 pad abort.
Oh, yeah.
So in the middle of all of this, mess, SpaceX had also been selected for the Commercial Crew Program. So basically, this was an effort to return American astronauts to space on an American vehicle. So they developed the Dragon 2 spacecraft. So this is the pad abort, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the pad abort. So this was the pad abort test. Basically, this test is basically testing the launch abort motors for Dragon 2. So what that will do right there is it will allow Dragon 2 at any...
Uh-oh. Nakara.
What?
Okay. You froze for a second.
My back?
Yep, you're back.
Okay, cool.
Sorry.
Anyway. What's with the water or liquid? What do you mean, Stormy?
So that will allow I think you froze right when you were saying this will allow the crew module to...
Oh, actually that's a really good question. There's a couple of reasons. Those are called rainbirds. That's what they call them. They spray down the pad with water as a rocket is launching. There's 2 reasons they do this. First of all, they don't want to catch anything on fire, which does happen. But secondly, the actual most important reason that they do that is because if a rocket launches from a pad without water suppression, the actual acoustic waves, the sound coming off the rocket engines, will actually destroy the pad. The water absorbs the sound energy and stops it from ripping the pad apart.
Now, does this happen at every launch? It's just that you can see this one more because you're zoomed in right at the bottom?
Happens with every launch, yeah. And they actually had to do a bunch of upgrading to the water suppression for Falcon Heavy, which we'll talk about in a bit.
Yeah.
So what this will allow us to do, or sorry, what this allows them to do is it allows Dragon 2 to escape a rocket explosion at any point in the flight. So, and that is triggered automatically, but even if it's not triggered automatically, there's also a control in the cockpit for the astronaut who can trigger it themselves if they feel the need to. There is an actual test of that capability of being able to escape at any point in flight that's going to happen early next year. Now, this is cool. This is the propulsive hover test for Dragon 2. Now, unfortunately, it'll never get to use this capability, but Dragon 2 did have the capability to propulsively land. It could just fly itself back down and land softly on a landing pad anywhere in the world, really. But NASA was not comfortable with that, so they decided that SpaceX wouldn't be allowed to land that way. But that was a demonstration that the spacecraft was able to hover on its own, using its engines.
Is there a reason that they won't let it do that?
Risk. They're not comfortable with the risk, and SpaceX decided it would take far too much effort to prove to NASA that
it works.
That it works. Because they would have to fly it over and over and over and over and over. And unfortunately, unlike some of the previous technology demonstration that SpaceX has done, they weren't going to allow them to do any of the tests on any of the operational missions. So there was no way to get it. There was no way other than spending ludicrous amounts of money to get it to actually be tested.
Right.
So, Stormy, they are building pods, sending pods to send people to space. It's just that now they're going to be landing in the water like the Apollo capsule did. And they'll be picked up by a ship and brought back to land. So,
thanks, Fire.
Moving along from... Oh, thank you very much, Fire. Right, so we had Dragon 2. And now we move on to, again, more... You wanted Big Boom. You're about to get a really, really big frickin' boom.
What? No.
Uh-oh. Oh, look, it's an ad. Why do you not have an ad blocker, David?
I do, but it doesn't have it through Streamlabs. There.
That's brutal.
Sorry. And now there's a thing. Why is it? Oh, it's because they've monetized their...
Yeah. Yes, launch report monetized your video. That's fine. I mean, you can still see the explosion.
You can see the explosion.
Yeah, so let's ask the class, what was weird about that explosion? Well...
Oh. Here, I'm going to play the sound, because...
Yeah, sure. That's fair. Let's listen in. Oh my. All right. So, the weird thing about that explosion, and something that really confused SpaceX right off the bat, The rocket was not firing. The engines were not on.
Yeah.
That was an explosion that took place during fueling. They were filling the rocket with fuel, and it blew up. And this was by far the most difficult failure that SpaceX ever had, because they didn't know what went wrong.
Now, I remember at the time there was actually some thought that it might have even been sabotage. There was some
thought that. So here's the deal. The way that it ended up having failed, or the way that they eventually discovered that the vehicle failed, there would have been almost no way to tell the difference between the way it actually failed and the rocket being shot with a high-powered rifle. So for a while, they seriously considered, because they were seriously considering everything, they seriously considered sabotage as a possible reason for the rocket explosion. This included them asking ULA if they could search the roof of their building for possible evidence of a sniper, which is interesting. So this took place on September 1st of 2016. So this was just a little over a year after their previous failure. Not a great time. And for months, they couldn't figure out what had gone wrong.
Snipers are a great excuse, Rudy. You should always use snipers as an excuse.
But anyway, basically what had happened is, and this is a bit of a technical explanation, so I'll try and break it down as best I can. First of all, this had never happened before on any rocket ever, period. The reason it happened, remember I was going back to where I talked about them using deep cryofuels and how nobody does that? Well, nobody does that. So when it failed for that reason, it was completely unforeseen because it had never happened before. What happened is those darn COPVs again. One of the COPVs, so actually I got to go step back for a moment. A COPV is an aluminum tank, and it's wrapped around and around and around and around and around, and around, very, very, very tight with composite overwrap, which is basically carbon fiber, to reinforce it. But because there's so much pressure on it from the carbon fiber, the older tanks, actually ended up with very, very, very tiny little wrinkles and dents in them from the pressure of the carbon fiber pressing in on them until they were filled up. And then all of those wrinkles wore out got pushed out because the pressure inside a COPV is something like 5,000 PSI. So the problem here was they were filling the liquid oxygen tank on the second stage. Inside the liquid oxygen tank was all the COPVs. And they were also filling, shortly after that, they filled the COPVs with helium. Unfortunately, they got the liquid oxygen a little bit too cold, and some of it filled that space in between one of the little divots in the COPV, between the aluminum wall of the COPV and the carbon overwrap. So it's just a little space there. And the liquid oxygen actually froze into solid oxygen. Then they filled that COPV with helium, which meant that little divot actually got pushed out. That broke the fibers of the carbon fiber. And unfortunately, pure oxygen needs very, very, very to spontaneously cause anything to burn and explode. So it actually burned the carbon fiber, used the carbon fiber as a fuel source, and it exploded. This took them a very long time to figure out, by the way, and they were trying very hard. But you can understand why it would take a while. So that led to a downtime again. As I mentioned, they had to put all of their launches on hold for about 5 months. That brought them into 2017, January 14th, 2017, and they returned to flight once again.
T-minus 10. 9,
This went a lot better.
8.
This was not the return to flight, but this was a few months later.
Oh, it's not. Sorry.
No, it's okay. No, it's okay. We don't have a video for return.
Oh, we don't
to flight.
have the return to flight. Okay.
No.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I'll play that instead.
So what this was, now keep in mind, they had been landing rockets for a while at this point, and despite their failure, they were still hot on the heels of reusability. This flight here, SES-10, was the first ever reuse of an orbital class rocket. This was relaunching a rocket that had already flown. And it was a beautiful, perfect success. And it also landed again. This was the beginning of what Arianespace's president once referred to as the SpaceX steamroller. Back in 2014, the president of Arianespace warned that they could see that SpaceX was coming and that they would be a steamroller that would basically roll over the launch market. Falcon 9 would go on to launch 18 times in 2017. That is an enormous number of launches. They launched more rockets than any nation in the world. Yes, that's right, folks. They launched more rockets than any nation in the world in 2017. So we can probably... That's SES-10.
Yep.
It was awesome. It was a perfect success. We're going to move along to CRS-11.
Oh, come on.
Oh, look, we get to watch a car commercial. So CRS-11... the launch of CRS-11 was another type of reusability. As you can tell by the lack of a fairing, this is a Dragon spacecraft mission to the space station. This was the first reuse of the Dragon spacecraft. They had flown this one previously on CRS-4, so it was a couple of years to refurbish it. But they were hell-bent on reusability. So the main thing that they reused on this was what's called a pressure vessel. Honestly, also the most important part. It's the structure of the spacecraft. Yes, we're definitely a shill for the auto industry.
100%. I will shill for anyone. We are shilling for SpaceX right now. They've paid us in historic and life-changing moments.
So let's move along to the landing video.
Oh my god, these ads are killing me. I need to. I didn't know this would happen. I'm gonna try and work something out for this.
We'll figure it out.
I'll figure it out next time. I'm sorry, everyone, that you literally can't see the.
That's hilarious.
Maybe I can get a better one.
All right.
That's a better one.
So
this one's at least see-through.
it's a see-through one at least, yeah. So early in 2017, they were able to complete the first reuse of an orbital class booster and the first reuse of a Dragon spacecraft.
It's back. The green
one's
one's
back.
back.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
Right at the wrong time.
Yeah.
All right. So let's move along
Yeah.
to the infamous Zuma. So this is into 2018. We're actually getting close to the end here. Sorry about that.
Like, what a...
So I wanted to show you this picture. Now, I wanted to take a very long look at the picture because it's really freaking cool. This picture is by my favorite launch photographer. His name is John Kraus. He's 18 years old. He's been photographing launches since I think he was 15, and he is amazing. Now, what you can see in this long exposure is the rocket is launching and then going on this ballistic trajectory. But you can also see where stage separation is. You can see the first stage. You'll see the first stage arcs up and then comes back. And then you can see the re-entry burn from the first stage, and then the landing burn right down near the ground off in the distance. It's an amazing picture. He captured all of it in one shot.
It's just glorious.
Now, what makes Zuma special? Well, Zuma's really interesting. Zuma was a very, very, very secret mission. We still don't know which branch of the government actually ordered the mission. Zuma, we later found out, was a $3.5 billion satellite. And Falcon 9 performed perfectly. The Falcon 9 launched successfully. Stage separation. Falcon 9 landed. And the second stage continued on. One important thing. For most customers, SpaceX builds the payload adapter. This is the part that attaches the rocket to the actual payload. And also the part that deploys the payload. For this mission, because it was so top secret, Northrop Grumman, which is a U.S. defense contractor, was contracted by whoever asked them to do it to build, to oversee the launch and also to build the payload adapter. Unfortunately, they did a really bad job. They didn't test whether or not it would work in space. They only tested whether or not it would work on the ground. Worked great on the ground. Also, fun thing, they didn't allow SpaceX to point any cameras at the payload because it was so top secret. So when the time came for the payload to detach from the second stage, the payload adapter said, "Yeah, I did my job just great. Everything went perfectly." It never separated. And SpaceX didn't know that it didn't separate because they didn't have any cameras. If they had known that it didn't separate, they may have been able to do something to get it to separate. As it was, Zuma and the second stage of the Falcon 9 crashed back into the ocean. The mission from SpaceX's perspective was a success, but from the perspective of the customer was a failure. We don't even know who the customer was.
Now, is the customer is SpaceX the one that is at fault for this, or does it end up being Northrop Grumman because they are the ones that built the bloody thing that didn't work?
There was a big investigation, and the U.S. government has now officially placed the blame on Northrop Grumman.
That is good for SpaceX.
It is.
So
Northrop Grumman and SpaceX came out immediately to say they didn't blame Northrop Grumman, but they immediately said
it wasn't that.
Falcon 9 performed its mission perfectly.
Yeah. Can I, however, because we still don't actually know anything, I am going to posit the alternate theory. What Zuma actually was Skynet, and Elon Musk is Sarah Connor sent back and acting as Elon Musk, and she destroyed Skynet before it was even able to launch, saving the human race.
Okay.
That's my alternate.
That's quite the alternate.
There you go. You heard it here first.
All right. So many years prior, back in, I believe, 2011, Elon Musk had talked about another vehicle after Falcon 9 called Falcon Heavy. What's so hard about that? You just strap 3 Falcon 9s together and you fire them off. Yes, it was not that easy. Which he later admitted contritely. they didn't really understand how much they would have to, how many engineering challenges they'd have to overcome. But the real reason it took like 5 years past its original launch date to launch Falcon Heavy was that Falcon 9, the vehicle it was associated with, kept changing all the time. They kept upgrading it and upgrading it and upgrading it, upgrading it, on and on and on. And the problem was if they finished Falcon Heavy during that, they would then have to update both vehicles constantly. So they waited until they were almost done. So, February 2018, we got to see the Falcon Heavy demo flight. This one we should grab audio for.
Will we get hit for music?
Oh, we probably will, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, just mute it.
Sorry, Al. I would love to play the audio for this. You should go and watch it.
Hey, we should. But this is an amazing, amazing launch. So this launch doubles the maximum payload capacity of the largest rocket in the world. This rocket doubles the payload capacity of the Delta IV Heavy, which was the previous largest rocket in the world. Ironically, they are physically a very similar size. But because Falcon Heavy uses rocket-grade kerosene as fuel instead of hydrogen, which is what Delta IV Heavy uses, it's got a lot more power packed into its size. And look at that! There's a Starman in a Tesla! That's weird. Oh, also, yeah, the center core kind of missed. This was probably
the one, but then this.
This is my favorite. This is my favorite day, I think, of 2018. I sat and watched the stream of Starman for the whole 5 hours that it ran.
Yeah,
as he floated around the Earth. So this mission, the Falcon Heavy demo mission, sent Elon Musk's cherry red Tesla Roadster, with onboard Starman, all the way to the orbit of Mars. Not in orbit of Mars, but into Mars's orbit around the sun. Same distance. All right. So now, once we finished off with Falcon Heavy, we ended up with Falcon 9 Block 5. Now, what the heck is Falcon 9 Block 5? Well, remember how I said we were getting almost to the end of Falcon 9's reign? Or Falcon 9's, not reign, Falcon 9's upgrades? Well, there we are. Falcon 9 Block 5 is the zero-looking rocket at the top there. It is black and white. And it includes a ton of changes. Tons of changes. Dozens of changes. Hundreds of changes that were designed to make the rocket more reusable. Before that, the Falcon 9 full thrust rocket could be reused once easily. But beyond that, you needed pretty significant refurbishment in order to reuse it again. So they designed another version of the Falcon 9 Block 5, which had all of the parts had been upgraded basically to be much more durable. And this version of the rocket will be capable of flying 10 times without refurbishment. So remember, I said without refurbishment. They will be able to launch this rocket, land it, fuel it up, and launch it again. Up to 10 times. And if they refurbish it after the 10 launches, they figure they can get, and they continue to refurbish it in those increments of 10 launches, they can probably get about 100 launches from a single rocket core. Pretty amazing stuff. This also will basically be the end of development for. There are still a few little tweaks to make as they prepare for the commercial crew program. But it's basically coming towards wrapping up. Now, one of the things I wanted to mention here is all of the, all of this time they've been landing, they had been using aluminum, which were great. The grid fins helped them control the landing and control their attitude when they were coming into the atmosphere. But they got a little toasty. So let's take a look now at Falcon 9's aluminum grid fins catching fire.
I also want to quickly point out that them getting 100 launches out of one of these rockets is basically the number of launches normally in a year for rockets.
For like all rockets.
2017 saw a total of 90 orbital launch attempts.
Yep.
90 total in a year. And SpaceX is going to get 100 out of them out of one rocket. It's insane.
Yep. It sure is. All right. So this was one of my favorite little bits of a launch. This was just fun. You get to see the issue with using aluminum grid fins, and it's quite the fireworks show. So watch the frame on the left as it comes out of a re-entry burn. This rocket successfully landed. But as you can tell, it's a little toasty.
No, it looks fine.
There's plasma and sparks and flame. Like the grid fins are on fire. It got very, very toasty. So Elon went, hell with that. We have to replace these things with every launch. That's not reusable. So they created new grid fins. The new grid fins for Block 5 were titanium. They are basically completely impervious to sphere.
Sorry.
The aluminum or the titanium grid fins are the largest piece of cast titanium in the world. Period. Yeah. They're very expensive, but they can be reused literally indefinitely with no refurbishment and no paint. So they're pretty amazing. Among the other improvements they made to Block 5 were titanium heat shields around the base of the rocket. They have active liquid cooling around the base of the rocket. They have another increase in thrust for the Merlin engine. They have improved the fairings, which goes into our lovely attempt at fairing recovery, which we might talk about in a bit. And then, and there are many other that I could go into, but the biggest one that actually made the most difference was that they uprated all of the valves and moving parts in the rocket to be much more durable. All right. So this booster is actually, as you can see number 45 on the side. This was the last Block 4 booster. And I just wanted to once again highlight the amazing work of John Krause. This is just such a beautiful launch picture. This was launching TESS, which was the Transiting Exoplanet Survey Satellite for NASA. Basically, it's going to go find more alien planets.
What do we
Sorry,
want
folks,
to hit
just
here?
checking. Let's go to the Bangabandhu launch.
Okay. So I think we're gonna be getting ready to end because we've gone for 2 hours instead of 1. We're actually going to be ending before we cover everything, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. Let's hit the Bangabandhu launch.
Yes.
Here we go.
So Bangabandhu 1 was the initial launch for Block 5, as you can see. Zebra rocket.
And there's all the water.
And hey, there's the Rainbirds. Gotta love it. This is Pad 39A, and one of the reasons that the Rainbirds are so noticeable is that it had been upgraded for the Falcon Heavy. It needed much bigger Rainbirds. Or else Falcon Heavy would have ripped the pad apart. 27 engines for that launch. Now, this launch, first launch of the Block 5, it went gorgeously. Basically as perfect as can be. This rocket has already flown again now, just about a week ago, I think. And in that time frame, so this one launched. This launch, Bangabandhu 1, was in May, and it launched again here in August. In that time in between, they had enough time to completely tear it down, check it, and make sure that all of the parts that they thought would last a long time actually performed well in the first flight. And they were able to launch it again in about a little under 3 months. So let's take a look at the landing. Or the pixelated storm that was the attempt to check out the landing. But as you can see, beautiful landing on, of course, I Still Love You, out in the Atlantic Ocean.
One thing that we said we'd bring up earlier, but we didn't, is we've talked a fair bit about the damage that a rocket can do to the pad and to the the pad infrastructure. And we do actually have an image here after the Amos 6 failure.
Yeah.
That's part of what the launch pad sort of looked like from very far away after one of the large explosions. You can tell that it didn't do so hot. They actually ended up they ripped that whole pad apart. They replaced a lot of stuff, and they actually ended up a lot of the wiring was burned underground. That's how big the explosion was. So they ended up ripping out all the old wiring, and they actually found that a lot of the wiring had been there since the Apollo days. So they were actually, in the end, kind of happy to rip it all out because they upgraded everything to fiber, and it's a much better pad now than it was before. But it was also a very expensive fix. Not cheap to rebuild a launch pad. So where would you like to cut off here, David? I think we should actually talk very, very briefly about the commercial crew.
Absolutely. Yes.
Just
so commercial
just
crew
here, and then I'm going to play this video actually, and you can talk. Right?
Sounds great.
Okay.
Yep. So the commercial crew program is, again, NASA contracted with SpaceX to build the Dragon 2 spacecraft, or a spacecraft specifically just known as Crew Dragon. Their contract is $3.2 billion in total for the entire program. This included all of the development, and it will include 6 flights, I believe. The really exciting bit about this is they've been working towards this for quite some time, trying to get closer and closer and closer to actually being able to do this. Just about a week ago, the first astronauts were selected for the first SpaceX missions to the International Space Station. The first crewed mission is currently scheduled for around April of 2019, but most excitingly, we're actually going to get to see Dragon 2 launch, looks like in November, right around my birthday. That will be the uncrewed launch, so the first launch. In between those two, I mentioned before, there would be the in-flight abort test where Dragon 2 tries to escape a launching rocket. So right at max Q, which we again referred to earlier, max Q is the period of maximum dynamic pressure on the rocket, so the most forces on the rocket. They're going to try and separate Dragon 2 and have it escape from the rocket. So that test will be probably January, or maybe February or March, but it'll be between the uncrewed test and the crewed test. But it's really exciting. Very, very, very few organizations have ever been able to do crewed space launch. There are 3 nations that have done it. The US, Russia, and China. And that's it. No commercial company has ever done it. There is one other company in the commercial crew program, which is Boeing. They have developed a similar capsule type spacecraft. Theirs is called the CST-100 Starliner. And it will also ferry astronauts to the space station. Their program was reported to be a little bit ahead of SpaceX's, but recently they had an anomaly, is what they like to call them. They had a problem, and their flights have been pushed back. So it looks like it's going to be Dragon, which will carry astronauts first.
And all of that is actually going to lead us to the end of our show for the day. We know we went a bit long. It's going to take us a bit to tune this in. But the subjects that we were going to talk about for the rest of today actually lead us...
Sargarath is like more.
You're going to get more in 2 weeks. We're going to do another of these in 2 weeks. But this is actually perfect because... the topic that we left off with the past to the present. Basically, what we were going to be getting into shortly was the future of SpaceX and basically what Elon Musk's goal has been this entire time with SpaceX.
We're also going to talk a little bit more about what their current status is.
Yeah.
We'll talk a bit about fairing recovery, second stage recovery, and basically what all of their near-term goals are. And then we're going to look way off into the medium term and then even into the far future.
And that we're gonna sort of springboard off that SpaceX far future into what our actual topic for next week is going to be, which is we're going to sort of discuss the difficulties of living on things that aren't Earth. So living in space on the ISS, living on the moon, colonizing Mars, etc. We're going to look into sort of what it takes for humanity to get off Earth. Really?
Exactly.
Yeah. So
thank you very much for watching. Apologies for some hiccups. We're still learning a new format, but we'll get good eventually. I hope you all enjoyed joining us on Mars too. I'm not sure if you noticed, but that's not Arizona in the background. That is Mars. Mount Sharp, where Curiosity is on the surface of Mars.
And we will be talking a lot more about that exactly in, 2 weeks?
2 weeks?
Yeah.
Thank you very much for joining us.
No, you didn't rate us now, did you?
Bye.
Well, I mean, if we just got rated now. Hello, everyone that's just rated us. We're actually not... oh my god. You rated us now. We're actually not... So, Captain Richard was probably playing some game of some sort. We've actually just been here talking about the history of SpaceX for the past 2 hours.
Yeah. Well, not quite 2 hours, but almost 2 hours.
Some game. I don't know what... The game. Okay, so you were playing Star Citizen.
The game.
We've been talking about SpaceX. Yeah, thank you very much for the raid. We've been talking about SpaceX for the last 2 hours. We were actually just about to shut down, but what do you think, Nakara? Do we have anything left?
Tell us the history of Tesla for the next hour. I mean, we could go on, but that's entirely up to you, David. You're running the show.
Well, does anyone want us to continue?
We're talking about space sex. definitely.
The TLDR version, we've actually just been doing the TLDR version of SpaceX's history. It took us 2 hours to get here. We got to present day, and we were just about to start looking into the future. So we were about to start talking about the BFR, the future of SpaceX.
Start over.
Start over. No, if you want us to start over, you can go watch the video on demand, because thanks for the follow. Oh man, I don't even know what to do now.
Do you just want to cover the current status and then we'll cut off?
Sure, let's cover the current status.
Okay, so I just want to talk more about where we're at right now.
Yeah, we're gonna. For everyone here that came here for a game, you're gonna get some SpaceX knowledge. Here we go.
So, where are we at right now with SpaceX? Falcon 9 Block 4 was recently retired. They always, whenever they're switching blocks, they always overlap a little bit. For example, Falcon 9 Block 5 first flew in May, but it wasn't until July before they actually completed that switch. You
know what? Captain Richard has a point here, telling people a little bit about Relay before they get annoyed about SpaceX and disappear. So, Relay, we do transcripts for basically everything Star Citizen. We've got relay.sc. It's a news site for Star Citizen, and every Saturday, 2:30 Eastern to 4, we have a podcast basically covering the news of the week for Star Citizen. This is actually our new show. This is our attempt to do something a little less Star Citizen, to be honest. It's called Relay Space. This is our first episode of it. It's where we're talking all about SpaceX and the history of SpaceX, and from the beginning to the end of SpaceX. And we are going to be covering every 2 weeks. We're going to be having an episode of this, either covering science or tech or space topics, and basically just doing a little deep dive into those territories to talk about them and answer questions and show pretty videos and such. So
exactly,
that's who we are. That's what we do. And we're going to talk about SpaceX for a bit now. Captain Richard, thank you very much for the raid.
Thank you so much. All right. So, where are we at now? Falcon 9 Block 5 is taken over. Falcon 9 Block 5 is the new rocket. It's not a completely different rocket. It's the same size and shape. It looks similar, but it's super upgraded. It's much more reusable than the old Falcon 9 Block 4. They can reuse it 10 times without refurbishment. 100 times possibly if they refurbish it after every 10 flights. That is pretty amazing. Considering rockets were not reusable as of 3 years ago.
At all.
So I just wanted to quickly point out this amazing picture from Trevor Mallman. He caught that picture a couple weeks ago during a mission. I think that was the Telstar mission, the one you mentioned earlier. A couple weeks ago, SpaceX launched the largest communication satellite ever launched, period, which was Telstar 19 Vantage.
7.8 tons.
No, 7.08 tons, but still. Very, very heavy.
Okay, sorry, 7.1 metric tons, yeah.
Yes. It is just absolutely huge. Ridiculously huge. But that is an amazing picture that he got of Falcon 9 flying through, basically punching a hole. Basically what it did is punch a hole in a cloud. And then there was like a rainbow effect because the light from the rocket was shining through the water molecules inside the cloud. It's so cool. Anyway. Transition to Block 5. Falcon 9 is now complete. Their major topic right now is they're trying to get ready for commercial crew. They're going to be launching humans to space soon, and they got to get ready. So they have their demo flight in November. where they're going to launch the Crew Dragon for the first time. It will be unmanned for the first flight. Then the in-flight abort will take place. I'm actually hearing now it's about 4 months after, so it's probably going to be in February or early March. And then in April of 2019, they will launch Crew. They've already selected the Crew. They were visiting SpaceX today.
Just going to show the for the people that haven't seen, I'm going to show the pad abort of the Dragon again because
that's a great idea. Yep. So this was actually way back in 2015. They did a pad abort test to demonstrate the launch abort system for the Dragon 2. Now, what that is showing you is that spacecraft can get away from an exploding rocket. So the people, if there are any aboard, will be completely safe. Even if the rocket explodes, they can still get away. Now, they actually have 2 ways to trigger it. It's actually triggered automatically if a failure is detected. And there's also a manual, there's actually a handle right on the control panel where they can manually actuate it if they feel they have to. Pretty cool. Current status. Sorry, brain is just catching up. Now, you're also showing Mr. Steven, so we should look at Mr. Steven now. Mr. Steven is ridiculous. Hello, Mr. Steven. Mr. Steven is the fairing recovery boat. Basically, every rocket company thinks SpaceX is crazy. They're like, hey, we want to use the fairings again. And other companies are like, well, you can't. And SpaceX goes, why?
And they say, because... And SpaceX says, isn't that what you said about reusing rockets? And the companies go,
okay. So, how are they going to recover the fairings? Fairings don't have any... They're not really... Are you leaving?
I'm back, don't worry.
Fairings are basically just covers. They cover up the satellite while it's launching into space, and then they separate and they fall back to Earth. 99 point, well, no, not 99%. 100% of the time, that means they just slam into the ocean at like 1,000,000 miles an hour and explode, basically. I mean, explode in that they crash very hard into the ocean. But Elon basically figured, well, why can't we recover them? What if we put a parachute on it, so the parachute deploys, and then we can catch it? We can catch it. So we're going to catch it. So they got this super, super, super fast boat. That boat is actually a lot bigger than it looks. It's 200 feet long. That is, but it's incredibly fast. Cruising speed's about 25 knots, which is pretty to for a boat that size. Now, the bottom picture there was the original setup for the arms that held the catching net to try and catch the fairings. They were never able to successfully catch a fairing with that setup. The closest they got was 50 meters away, and they just couldn't react fast enough to catch it while it was falling. So Elon's, well, screw it. We're going to make the net bigger. A lot bigger. So the top picture you see is them attaching the new arms to Mr. Steven, which is the name of the boat. That's a really big net.
It's bloody huge.
Unfortunately, the only time they've actually tried to use it so far, it didn't work, but that was because they were in the middle of a storm when they tried to catch it. They actually were able to get close enough to see the fairing, but they weren't able to catch it because it was the gale force winds. They couldn't. They actually barely landed the rocket on that attempt because the seas were out of control. But yeah, so that is their current attempt to catch fairings. Now, why would you catch a fairing, you ask? Like, isn't it just a piece of carbon fiber? Who gives a shit? Well, here's the truth. Fairings are custom-made composite structures that have to be made to very exacting standards, and they're very expensive. That fairing for Falcon 9 is $6 million.
There's a fairing.
Yeah. Now, I mean, that
It's
sounds
worth
really
more than any
expensive.
of us.
So each fairing half, so what you can see there in the picture, that's $3 million. If you can catch it in a net, then you get to use it again instead of making another one for $3 million.
I mean, I'd try and catch one of those for $3 million.
That's a terrible joke, Desmarius, and you should feel bad.
Oh.
So
Yes.
So now that doesn't sound expensive, and it is expensive. It's 1/10 of the cost of the entire rocket. No, sorry, not even 1/10 of the cost. It's 1/10 of the price of the rocket. Actually, probably more like almost 15-20% of the actual cost of the rocket. It's expensive. But ULA's fairings are... ULA chose to make very large fairings for their rockets. It's one of the things that makes them really expensive. 5-meter fairing for Atlas V is $20 million. Expensive shit. So that's why they have a giant boat with a giant net with giant arms that's trying to catch things falling from space. The other thing that's kind of in progress right now, but they're working on it, but it's sort of in a we really want to do this, but we are trying to figure out how stage. They really want to make the Falcon rocket completely reusable, 100% reusable. If you get the fairing and you get the first stage, what about the second stage? Well, there's a really big problem with that. How do you get the second stage back? First of all, the second stage of a rocket has what's called a vacuum engine. That means it can't fire in atmosphere. Or I can, but it's very bad for it and can cause problems. It's also not very efficient in atmosphere either. But Elon wants to give it a go. He wants to try and find a way to recover that second stage. His current idea is to use what's called a balloon. It's a balloon and a parachute. And basically what would happen is, the idea here is that you massively increase the surface area of the vehicle without massively increasing the weight. And also, very likely, you have a deployable heat shield. All of these things are one thing. So basically, you have a huge deployable heat shield that massively expands the surface area and allows it to break through the atmosphere. And guess how they're going to recover it? That's right. They're going to catch it with a boat.
They love trying to... Did Elon not play enough baseball as a kid? Or did
Apparently
he play
not.
too much?
I think yes might be the answer to this question.
Okay. Because, yeah, I mean, it seems like their answer to everything is let's try and catch it.
Pretty much. The problem, or the reason that they're trying to catch it is because if you let it fall into the ocean, it's basically impossible to reuse it because salt water does really bad things to electronics. So you have to catch it before it hits the water. Same thing is true about the fairing. It has to be caught before it hits the water.
So just for the people that have showed up, I am showing this. This is one of SpaceX's recent launches. It's the Bangabandhu satellite launch.
Yep.
Just so that you can actually see, this is all the first stage that's going around right now. In a little bit, I mean, it's going to take a bit, but the first stage will cut off. The second stage will take over. First stage will land. It's
we'll just let it run.
Yeah, just
let it run. So this was the first. This was the first launch.
Hang on, is it just for us that people are having to refresh? Because I don't know what's going on. I am
Captain
gonna cry.
Richard, were you having the same problem in your channel?
Because everything's looking okay on my end. I don't know what it's doing. Twitch.
We figured it was Twitch because it's not like it stops. Like it'll usually continue. It's weird.
Anyway,
it just freezes randomly. Anyway, here's the separation if you wanted to watch it. Stage separation's coming up in a few seconds. And boom. Bye. It looks so much better than back with Falcon 1, right?
Yeah, just a little.
We were showing some Falcon 1 shots at the very beginning of our show this evening, and Falcon 1 had 2 failures that were related to stage separation.
Yeah.
So, looks a lot better.
So, what else did we want to... What else do we want to try and
Thanks,
cover
Rudy.
here?
Well, that's up to you. We're basically at the point where we would probably want to start heading into future stuff. So, I don't know. Do you want to? Are you done for this evening? It is almost. You're getting towards midnight there.
It is getting towards midnight here, but there are a lot of people, and I don't want to let them all go disappointed because I don't actually know how to raid someone else. Which is the largest.
You know, Google exists, you know.
I know, but I kind of hope that people come back in 2 weeks because we got a hell of a lot more to talk about.
I think we should leave that for another show, and we can refine it. We can refine it further. We're going to talk about. Here's what we're going to talk about in our next show. We're going to talk about BFR. We're going to talk about Starlink. We're going to talk about. Yes, Sargareth. Those are the new titanium grid fins you can see there. We're going to talk about the old ITS proposal. We're going to talk about BFR. We're going to talk about Starlink. We're going to talk about Mars and the moon. And how the hell to survive out there.
It's really, really hard to survive outside of Earth. And we've got the ISS, and people can float around on the ISS a bit. But we've never survived anywhere else. And one of the things about SpaceX, and one of the things that we're going to sort of launch into in 2 weeks, is this whole Elon Musk's plan is to colonize Mars. Right?
Yep.
So
that's his plan. That's always been his plan. Well, it's been his plan for a very, very long time, since his plan was sending a tiny greenhouse to Mars.
Kawasaki, we did actually touch on the Falcon Heavy. We actually showed the entire launch, pretty much. The demo flight of the Falcon Heavy. We've actually got it right here. We've touched on everything up till now, essentially. So we started with the Falcon 1, the founding of SpaceX, who the key founders were, a bunch of the early Falcon 1 failures, NASA's CRS sort of bringing them back from the brink, the Falcon 9s, the ups and downs of Falcon 9, the evolution till here.
Now. Just to give you an idea, too, we talked about the Merlin engine repeatedly today. The Merlin engine now has almost 4 times the thrust that it did when it was first created. That is unheard of and insane.
T-Step, I hate you. Hate you.
I'm sure it was absolutely spectacular. I've heard it was
amazing.
Just incredible. There were like over 100,000 people at the Cape watching that launch. I would have loved to be there. I've made a commitment to my nephew, and my nephew's made a commitment to me that we're going to see the first BFR launch, the demo launch, because that's going to be insane. And okay, if he sends a car to Mars orbit with the Falcon Heavy launch, what is he going to send with BFR?
His house.
His house. I could see it. He might send a boring machine.
That'd be great. So Sargareth, why did the center stage not land? It missed.
I actually have the answer if you want. No, it didn't miss.
Do it. What's the answer?
So early on, I talked about when we were talking about the Falcon 9 at the beginning, how you have that green flash at the bottom of the rocket when it ignites. a raid around the engines. That is what ignites the engines. They can't start themselves. They need an igniter fluid called TTEB, which is triethyl aluminum and triethyl borane. Now, straight up, the center core ran out of igniter fluid. It had to ignite 3 times. All 3 engines 3 times. On the 3rd ignition, the center engine lit and the 2 side engines failed to light. So that's why it failed. It basically hit the ocean at 500 kilometers per hour because it wasn't able to slow down enough.
And there you have it.
And, people asked Elon, well, how do you fix that? And he's like, well, you just put more igniter fluid in it.
Crazy, right? Okay, so I am going to. We're going to stop it for tonight because we don't really want to. Well, we don't want to continue into the BFR stuff because that'll
take a long time.
It's going to take us a long time, and it's going to be part of our next show. We really do hope that you guys do enjoy this. If you didn't see any of the beginning of it, it is going to be up on our Twitch and up on our YouTube later, so you can rewatch it if you want sort of the rundown on the history of SpaceX. Do follow or whatever if you'd like to come back in 2 weeks and hang out for our subsequent episode where we're going to be talking about the BFR, the future of SpaceX, and then the future of human life elsewhere in the solar system, because why the hell not? At the same time, I am going to attempt to launch a raid.
Who are you raiding?
I'm going to try to raid Mitachi.
Excellent.
I don't know if this is going to work, but I'm going to try it. So give me a second here while I figure out how to do a raid.
Raid!
We've never had to do a raid. We normally just send everyone to the pub.
Raid. Oh, actually, I got to remind people again. If you would like us to cover a topic, we are collecting topic ideas. Please submit them there.
Also,
yeah, pretty much. That's pretty much me all the time, and just sort of like, oh my god.
And also, if you do want to join us for a more Star Citizen focused thing, join us Saturday 2:30 to 4 Eastern, right here, where we'll be talking more Star Citizen. Captain Richard, thank you so much for the raid.
Yeah, thank you so much, Captain.
Greatly appreciated. Yeah, thank you a lot. And I hope you guys come back next time, and we'll see y'all in the verse. Now let's see if this works.
See y'all. I'm not from Texas, believe it or not. Raid! Excellent. We're raiding Mitachi.
Okay, so
all right, everybody. Thank you very much.